Larry English, former first round pick of the San Diego Chargers. Welcome to the pod.
Hey, appreciate you having me, man. This is exciting. Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's get right into it. So,
Yep.
uh, Aurora, Illinois. What can you tell us about the city that you grew up in?
Very cool. I think I've got a lot to be grateful for kind of my background. You know, that Midwest, in a certain way, in a certain sense, very much of kind of a blue collar type town. Um, you know, I was fortunate to have like a supportive ecosystem around me of family, like family support, like grandparents, aunts, uncles. Like growing up there in the Midwest, had that like real like down home type vibe and feeling. Large family, Sunday dinners, and what have you. Um, but again, yeah, like I said, pretty much a modest blue collar type town, greater Chicago area, about 20 miles outside the city of Chicago. And yeah, that was more or less the beginning of it all.
So, when did football first come into the picture for you?
Very early on, so my first season of organized football was 1994. I was 9 years old, and I can just remember very vividly, kind of having like this deep-seated like desire and urge to play this game. And I remember like the old school like analog TV antenna type situation. Um, Seeing, I guess, what probably would have been those Bears games back in the day. I was young, so I was never so much attached to kind of the team and the teams and the individuals or the characters. I was just truly like fascinated with this game, and I I at that time there was no Pee Wee League in our city in Aurora. But um, the city adjacent to us is a city um, named Naperville, Illinois. It's a little more of an affluent type area, and they had this Pop Warner league of football that you could start playing at like 7, 8, 9 years old. And so I was able to persuade mom and my grandfather to take me out there and get me signed up for ball. And I remember kind of like that first summer. Summers, by the way, in Chicago are really hot, so it's like extreme seasons. So you got super cold winters, super hot and humid summers, and I remembered like to this day, like that feeling and that smell of the grass, walking out there in the heat, getting signed up, uh, going and grabbing my shoulder pads and the whole like kind of like uniform and what have you. That first time at sign up, all these kids are signing up. And another like kind of like irony that I remember of that scenario is this it's like there's I don't I guess they're probably like a national company or maybe they're just a regional brand, but the brand was called Play It Again Sports. It was kind of like the you could go and get like used sporting equipment. And I remember at that time my family wasn't investing into buying me like brand new cleats and you know I think we had to buy our own helmet and stuff like that at the time. So I went and got all like this used gear, but I didn't care. All I cared was that I was out there on the field, and yeah, that was my first introduction to the game, and I'm very grateful and like fortunate for this game and what it's been able to like reveal and expose me to in my life, and um, those were those early beginnings, if you will.
One thing that I always hear people talk about, and I kind of think about it for myself as well, is this notion of signals. So, like, I know you're into the business game now, even me with doing the podcast, and we'll get into some of your business stuff later on. But people always talk about looking for these early signals, and I've talked to other podcasters, for instance, where it's like, hey, started this pod, and early on, it gained a lot of traction. That was kind of one of our early signals that this podcasting is working, and we've kind of found a niche with an audience. And so
Yeah.
I always try to relate that to whether it be sports or business or anything, where it's always looking for these early signals. And so I'm curious, like for you, when you started playing football, was it you put on the pads and immediately people are like, damn, like this, this Larry guy could be something? Or was it more of, maybe a slower start, but then towards, the end of your high school career, you kind of started becoming the player that you ended up being? Like how did you know that football was ultimately going to be your path? Or did you never know and it kind of just worked out that way?
Now, and now look, I don't believe in any stretch of the imagination that this is the only way forward relative to like materialization of like an outcome or a result. But for me, um, there was a natural proclivity towards this game, and I had like inherent like skill sets where I was a solid player very early on. Um, I think that even before like getting into that game, I also like got instilled with, by my grandparents, by my mother, this this level of like kind of like self-confidence and belief in self, um that I never considered like that I wasn't capable of certain things. So like look, I was naturally like kind of like bigger, like I from a size perspective, um I was big for my age, heavy set for my age, and all of these things. So they had me down on the D line, like playing like I think like nose guard or tackle or something like that. And just because I was big and strong, and I had fun doing it and was willing to like run around, I was like one of those like kind of like rough kids, if you will. It was like it came somewhat natural to me, like the physicality of it. But that in no way, shape, or form is enough for an individual to actually have like the conviction, faith, and belief that this can become an actual profession. I just didn't know, right? I was ignorant to the fact of like how low my chances were for like turning that into an actual uh career. And I caution myself in even using the word career as it relates to football, because when you get into the league, one of the things that you learn very quickly, I remember one of my coaches on the Chargers, Rich Bisaccia at the time, he put it very eloquently in that, as NFL players, it's very common to hear this term, your career, right? And I remember we were sitting in one meeting, and he was like kind of, I think we probably had a bad practice yelling everybody on in a film session. He's like, "You guys are treating like this as a career. This ain't a career. This is an opportunity, right?" And it truly is. It's a very finite period of time where you have this opportunity to capitalize on on the exposure you get, the um, access that you get to build character within yourself, to build confidence, to build process, to build discipline that you then use into like midlife, latter life, if you will. And so I look at it in very much that way. But yeah, like look, for me, it was I was a solid player very early on. Um, but more so important than that, I just had conviction and faith that it was to a degree what I was meant to be doing, at least for that period of time. And I never, no matter what happened, I never lost that kind of like vision and foresight. That's really the key, whether it be in sports, whether it be in business. It's just some of us actually have a vision for something that is not currently like apparent in material form. And it has to go beyond our five senses, the actual sight. Like sight and vision are two very, very different things. And I was fortunate enough to have vision around the fact that this could actually like lead to something where I could grow as an individual. I can make it my passion, my professional life, and my pursuit. So I'm, like I said, I'm grateful for having that. I guess part of it was instilled by my environment around me at that time, like my ecosystem and family, like giving me that level of uh, conviction and belief in self. And it actually worked out. And the interesting, piece about all of that is much of what occurred there in that whole dynamic of my life now fuels everything that I am building, working on, and working toward in this, call it like second chapter of my life as a professional, if you will. So that was kind of like the trajectory coupled with some of those like inherent, like internal, like emotions and beliefs that like characterize that journey.
I think I got about 7 different questions that I want to ask you. But real quick, I was reminded when you said, the NFL is an opportunity, not a career. What's that acronym? It's like NFL stands for not for long. And I
Yeah,
forget, I forget what the fact is. I remember reading it. But it's crazy. It's like, I think like the average NFL career is like 3 years. It might even be
three
shorter than
years. Yeah,
that.
3 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just wild. Because I always think about it as a fan. The reason that stat was so wild to me is because I think of all the players that I love, like, for example, like I'm a huge 49ers fan. So like George Kittle, McCaffrey, like Debo, like all these guys, all those guys have been around forever. And like when you think about it that way, it's like natural to assume, oh, everybody has a career like CMC, or everybody has a career like Debo, or
Hmm.
Justin Jefferson, or like all these guys who are playing or are gonna play for 10 plus years. Which is wild when you think about that the average career is only 3 years.
Yeah. That's how it is in uh most verticals and areas throughout life. The examples of success and high achievement, those examples, those players, those people, they become these kind of polarizing and iconic figures. So that can like skew the world's perception and representation of an area or a domain because we see the biggest and most iconic figures because they become the most omnipresent in our own kind of like in each one of ours kind of like perception. It is but when you really take into account the facts around any domain, there are exponentially more examples of, for lack of a better term, mediocrity in that domain. And when you look at the data and the metrics relative to like those numbers, then it becomes much more kind of clear what the realities really are. And in this instance, for which we're kind of like talking about that topic, it's the NFL lifespan, right? That's the reality of it, is this kind of like 3 year. That was always like the number, the metric that you heard. I don't know if it's still the same, but that was the one that I always heard during my era, was this like 3 year average career or lifespan of a professional football player. And I think when you take a step back and really like think about that, it makes sense because it's so physically demanding. The human body is really only meant to withstand so much. And in a competitive arena such as that, where you're scratching, clawing, and fighting to make the squad, that 53-man squad every season, there's always new, fresh legs coming in. And so those new, fresh legs, you know, over time, it's like those averages make sense because there's less miles on those new guys' legs coming in, and people get beat up, and like I said, the human body is really only meant to take so much. So you have those really exemplary figures that are able to like keep it all together, the whole mind, body, spirit, um, character traits, all of it taken together to have like these longer careers. But it truly is not common. Um, so that's even. more so of kind of like credit to the fact of seeing a guy that can make it 10 years in the league. That's why it's really, that's like kind of like the milestone that all of us as players were really seeking to like hit that first milestone. I ended up technically getting 7 seasons in, but at that point my body was completely finished, like knees, all of that stuff. Um, but I'm grateful and I'm fortunate to have played those 7 seasons and got to experience everything that comes along with it, because I think that it taught me a lot of lessons and built a lot of character. So again, like I said, an amazing opportunity.
I think that point that you made about the outliers becoming omnipresent is really good. And I heard this on the Bill Simmons podcast where he was talking about how Tom Brady and LeBron have skewed our perception of age in sports,
Yeah,
where, Tom Brady played till 45, whatever he was. And now, that's obviously clearly not normal. But now we get a quarterback who's maybe 35 and you're like, oh, like he can still play, he's still good, because we're skewed by that perception that just because Brady did it, now this 35-year-old quarterback can also do it and still should be performing at that level. Whereas that's not normal. Like if you took the average, like, for a quarterback, 35, 36 might be the point where their performance starts going downhill. And the same thing with LeBron. It's like, for NBA players, it's like after 30, you don't really know what you're getting, especially if it's a more athletic guy, their athleticism starts dropping off. But since LeBron is doing it, we now think, oh, this is normal. And so we expect these players to perform at that level, like LeBron, way past their 30s, which is not normal. So it's interesting how we take those outliers and then try to attribute it to everyone, which it
yeah,
obviously doesn't work.
yeah. No, we take the outliers and we extrapolate what we see there, and like, we perceive that as being common. It's very uncommon. The thing that most folks also don't realize is there's so many variables that go into creating that outcome for someone having that amount of longevity in uh in a sport, and especially a sport like basketball or football. Obviously, football, we are running into people for a living, so that's obvious. But even basketball, um, the amount of pounding that those guys take over the years, um, so many games, always, having to stay in shape. These are the physical aspects of it, but then also a really huge part of it is what goes on off the field, and like the level of like committedness and maturity um necessary to have a career that long. And the other thing that I would say in connection with that, when you really think about the maturity piece, is oftentimes the guys that have that level of maturity and like kind of like the serious nature about them from day one, where they're so focused on the game, like Tom Brady is a great example of that. He was so focused on that one thing, and I think it was a confluence of like of of variables that created like tailwinds for a career like his. Like once you taste from an early on in your career that winning, do you know what I mean? Um, Winning a Super Bowl really early on, and then that reinforcing this level of like belief through not only internally within yourself, but throughout an organization, and you just become like this dynasty, if you will. Then I really do believe that it can go one of two ways. It can promote like this idea of even sharper competitive like focus to taste that feeling again, so it drives all your decision making. Or it can, on the other side of the coin, there's it could be the opposite effect or outcome in self satisfaction, and then maybe not as much hunger, right? But obviously Brady had the right character traits, the proper level of maturity, with the right like ecosystem around him, from how that organization approached things, the coaches and the players, that it became like this really incredible tailwind for it to just be like it's all ball, you know? And yeah, you can have a long career in a scenario such as that. Um and look, I mean, the type of player he was, being a quarterback, not being necessarily a quarterback that optimized toward running around a whole bunch. It was very much a, you know, a psychological um, game for him and the way he played, and that all really worked out where it turned into a career where he played 20 plus years. What did he play? 22 seasons or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the point about tasting success early on is so true. I mean, stupid example, nowhere near on the level of winning a Super Bowl, but like I remember when my first like Instagram reel, went viral, and I started seeing all the comments and the likes coming in. I was like, man, this is awesome. But then it kind of flipped my mindset where that little bit of success, I was like, dang, like I want to do that again. Like I want to experience that
Hmm.
again. And then it pushes you,
Yeah,
like it motivates you to keep putting out better content, to keep editing, in a more professional way, and to do all these things. So I think that point about Brady is really good. Larry, I want to get back to your career. So high school, you're playing football, then you choose to go to Northern Illinois, which you've talked about. You had plenty of other schools who were offering you scholarships, and Northern Illinois at the time didn't seem like the I don't want to say the right pick because it obviously ended up working out for you, but it didn't seem like the most likely back then. So lead us through why choosing Northern Illinois and what went into that decision.
yeah. It definitely wasn't the most obvious pick. You put it that way. Um, but what went into that at that time is like, look, I coming from the Midwest, my dream was to play in the Big Ten. I wanted to play Big Ten ball. Um, Iowa specifically was like a school that showed a lot of early interest, and they were an incredible program at that period of time as well. So that was kind of like that was the squad that I wanted to play on very early on. But what ended up happening was that I at that time I wanted to go into my senior season having already decided on what the next chapter in my journey was, because like I as an example, where many kids like in the city where I grew up, it's like kind of you didn't necessarily want to go to like a private all boys military academy, for which is what I did, right? But I always had like this future pointed. I always have been, and I am to this day. I'm very like future focused, right? And I know it's important to be present and all of this stuff, but I have and always have had like this really inherent um perceptivity to like what could be, right? And for me, I was focused on what could be. And so while I would have loved to maybe go to West Aurora where like a lot of kids in my neighborhood were going, and that would have been like kind of like the fun situation. Like a lot of my boys were going to school there, and you know, it would have been much more seemingly fun socially and all these things. I also like was so focused. My most important point of focus was getting to like the next chapter in the equation for me, which was getting a D1 football scholarship. And I just sensed enough evidence that moving forward in faith and like taking this opportunity that looked like a little bit more stringent, a more disciplined uh, high school experience was going to set me up to be a better performer and would do more for my own like personal development to ensure that I got to the next level, which, like I said, for me was being, a D1 ball player. And so that was the reason why I was convicted enough to like pick this high school, which I felt was gonna like mold me into more of like it was going to like an iron sharpens iron type opportunity. I felt for me. So anyway, I go to this school and, I'm doing well. I'm developing as a player and what have you, building this level of like competency, toughness, grit, discipline. And by the time I was a junior, like I was getting a lot of looks from colleges, but most of the colleges were mid-major programs. And at that time, Northern Illinois was really doing well. They had in that season for which they put an offer in front of me, they had beaten Alabama that year, and this is before Alabama like went into their um, most recent phase of like bona fide dynasty. But it was still like a big time SEC program and always has been. They had beat Alabama, they had beat Maryland, they had beat Iowa State in the year that they had offered me. And if I remember correctly, they had gotten to, I want to say, like ranked 10 or 11 in the country. Um, that school was like right in my backyard. It wasn't the sexiest thing in the world for me because to a degree, it was almost like, I mean, it's 30 miles away, 25, 30 miles away from where I grew up. So it wasn't like I was getting that experience where I'm like going away to like this big, you know, uh, beautiful Big Ten campus or whatever. It wasn't overwhelmingly exotic, just put it like that. But um I saw it as an opportunity, and more so I felt that that program and the individuals there that, led that program had integrity, and they had I sensed like a level of belief that they had in me. And they exercised that belief by putting an opportunity and a scholarship in front of me early on. It's the first, if I remember correctly, they were the first school to actually offer me. After they offered me, pretty much every other mid-American conference school and mid-major program offered me, and they were really like courting me really heavily. And in the Big Ten schools, it was more so kind of like, yo, let's see what happens type scenario. So they were showing that interest, but they weren't putting it on paper. And one of the things with me is I wanted to go at that time for like the sure bet that I was going and becoming a D1 player. I didn't want to have like any risk that of an injury, anything like that would set me back in my senior season, and me have not taken the opportunity that was in front of me that I knew was certainty, because I believe that were I to get in the game and get in the arena, that I would make my presence known wherever I was at. And so that was the reason why I said, look, this organization, I'm not going to wait around for nobody else. I'm taking this while I got this opportunity. Ensuring that I'm taking this to the next level of playing for a D1 program. And I know, and I believe in myself that once I get there, then I'm going to do what is necessary to get me to that next level of making it to the NFL. So that was the reason why, again, like I said, I took them up on that offer. The only difference is that in most instances, it's very common to then decommit if a better opportunity arises. And that was just something that just did not resonate within my own spirit. I knew I wouldn't be the type to do that. And so while these other schools came back after the fact, after I did have, a great senior campaign and everything went great as a senior ball player, and some of those opportunities for bigger organizations then came back, I just didn't even entertain them. I'm like, look, I made a commitment. I'm sticking with my commitment. And that's what it is. I think that also, like, I probably always had like a certain level of like belief in, for lack of a better term, like karma. And so acting in a certain way, like you get your payoff, you get what you deserve in the long run. And that again, like I said, that's how it played out, and those were like the variables that drove that decision, that line of decision making.
So you now get to Northern Illinois, and you had a pretty interesting career there. So you played there from '04
Yeah,
to '08. Your
yeah,
first year, you basically missed because of injury. And then
yeah,
'07, you come back and you win the Mid-American Conference MVP. How would you describe your experience at NIU?
You know, it was true, kind of like trials and tribulations in a way, especially early on. When I look back to my career, like in those early years at Northern Illinois, I just am always like, it's like I'm shocked that I just kept this level of conviction. I don't know what it was. Maybe I just saw, evidence here and there that like kept my level of belief where it needed to be. But yeah, like the first couple years, I had injuries. Um, I didn't. So first things first, I was playing a completely new position because I was a linebacker. Played an inside linebacker, played middle linebacker in high school, and that's a completely different mentality from an edge rusher. That's by and large, your job is to get after the quarterback. It's completely like psychological frame from which you play the game. As a linebacker, you need to be all over the field. As a edge rusher playing defensive end, you more or less have one responsibility. The highest priority responsibility for you is to wreck games via the fact that you can beat an offensive lineman and put pressure on a quarterback to mess up their passing game. And when you're like switching positions, it takes a lot of reps and iterations before it kind of like clicks in your mind what you're actually out there to be doing. And it took me a couple years to really for that to actually turn on. And I remember at the time like looking at some of, you know, these edge rushers that measurable wise, the fastest guys, you know, looked like Tarzan and had all of like these native skill sets necessary to be like a super dominant player, but they didn't play with the right level of mindset and perception of what they were really out there to do, and they never like flourished or really kind of like came to fruition as players. And I was fortunate enough that something finally clicked with me that what I was out there to do. And it took about it took 3 calendar years up until my redshirt sophomore season where it like finally clicked. And going into that season, I was starting to like notice like my game was changing, and I was finally starting to like understand like subjectively, subconsciously what I was really out there to do. And I ended up having a breakout game when we were playing in our homecoming game, right? And we were playing Temple, and I I was playing against an offensive tackle. He ended up actually becoming like a really good player, but he was new. It was like one of his like first couple years playing basketball or playing football. He was a basketball player that that was 6'8" or something like that, and they put a whole bunch of weight on him and they had him out there playing tackle. And at the time when I got him that homecoming game, he did not know what he was doing yet. And I just kind of like had a field day on this guy. I had 4.5 sacks in one game, right? And that one game, that breakout game, if you will, it just did something for my uh kind of like swagger, if you will, and self-confidence in my own like capabilities. And from that point on, the remainder of my career, I just went on a tear as a pass rusher, so much so that by the time I was entering the draft, I was the nation's um active leader in career sacks in that draft. And it was like 30 something sacks or what have you. But it all started with that one game, and it just did so much for like my level of like conviction and faith in myself. And no matter how many times I got because I had injuries and surgeries and things like that after that, but I ended up not missing a game. I remember my senior season, I had two surgeries. It was on my thumb, so it wasn't they weren't like catastrophic type operations, but didn't miss a game. I would have surgery on like a Saturday or on a Monday and following a game, and I'd be back out there that following Saturday. But I had so much like faith in myself, then nothing would stop me. And so the thing about that, and I guess the reason why it's like, why are you telling me that? Why do I bring up that story? The reason why I bring up that story, and the reason why I always like to reflect back and to remember in that story, is because the day before that game of against Temple, I was the same player physically. It's just something else clicked, like mentally and psychologically. And then I actually believed it. I knew it. It just so happened that now I had this evidence, and that evidence fueled me to becoming like a very dominant player and future first round draft pick. But at the end of the day, there's no there's nothing physically or fundamentally different between the guy prior to walking on the field to that one game and the guy after. It's just the guy after had a completely like different mindset of this savage that couldn't be stopped. And that really like fueled results that I was fortunate enough to like materialize, that came out in, the real world, that came out on the game tape and what have you. So that's really the key. It's like we need to find that. We need to turn on that switch in our minds. And once we turn on that switch in our minds, then the rest is history. That's in literally any domain, any domain. So
you got that little taste of success. I mean, we talked about it earlier.
correct.
But you saw what you were capable of, and that kind of carried you to the draft and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I feel like not most people, I would venture out to say everyone is way more capable than they think. But a lot of times, to your point, it takes doing it, and it takes doing something well for you to actually see that you are capable of that thing, and it's really you that you're standing in your own path. And it's funny because like you said, business, football, sports, you see in every domain where you are your own biggest enemy. And once you figure that out and find a way to get past your own self and your own thoughts, I mean, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, for real. It's like we are the constraint, right? And but we only get past that. We only get past those bottlenecks and those blocks by actually getting into action. So you need the reps, you need the iteration, and you have to act. But people get so paralyzed by fear and anxiety around an outcome that if they don't desire, if you will, an outcome that they don't desire paralyzes them, keeps them in a state of inaction, and then there's a self-realizing effect to all of that. But at the end of the day, if we're able to actually like push through and act, and then dust ourselves off and do it again and do it again and do it again, then the results that we actually desire, that we want, they become an effect. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing. But like, look, so many of us can be paralyzed by that fear, then we don't act, and of course we everything that we had anxiety around, it will prove to be true, if you will.
I want to get your take on this. So we had TT Terry on the podcast, who was just in the Olympics. She's an Olympic sprinter. She's from Miami. Just really cool person. And I also had George Mumford on the podcast, which I don't know if you're familiar with George's work, but he's a kind of just a sports psychologist. He's worked with Kobe, with MJ, with a lot of the greats. And he was working with TT, which is how I got introduced to TT after having George on the podcast. And I asked TT, I was like, "What's the number one thing you learned from George?" And she said, "Just to go have fun." Because before, like, she would take everything so seriously, and she would be so down on herself. Like after a race, if she was 0.2 of a second slower than she wanted to be, she would beat herself up and do all this negative self-talk and say, dang, like, why? Like, you're so bad. Like, you're so slow. Like, you suck. And she said, George just taught me, she's like, you know what? Just go out there and have fun. Don't worry about the result. Don't worry about what's going to happen. Just be loose, have fun. And then I started thinking, like, what are some things in my life that I take too seriously that I could have just more fun with? And it's crazy because if you just did this exercise, like if you're listening to this, take like 2 seconds, think about all the things in your life that might be stressing you out, and then say, what would happen if I just had fun with it? Like if, I don't know, maybe you have like a huge presentation at work and it's stressing you out. What if you just had fun? Like what if you took it less seriously? And I think that's been a huge unlock for me, is just taking things less seriously and not taking them to be like this, like these big, huge tasks. Like I remember when I first started the podcast, obviously I was bad at the start. You could argue that I've gotten better, but who knows? But I remember just taking every interview like this like life or death situation. It's like, damn, like if I say one wrong word, or if I ramble on for too long, like people are gonna hate this, like whatever. And then there was just like a huge unlock for me to where I just said, listen, like just go out, have fun, be yourself. At the end of the day, it's an interview. You're talking to someone that you want to talk to, that you respect. And that's been just a huge, like I said, unlock, and the way that I approach things. So I'm curious, like within your own journey, like did you ever have that realization of maybe I'm taking this too seriously and I just need to go out and have more fun? Or were you always more of, no, this is really serious. I need to be locked in, at every step of the way?
Um, I think two things come to my two words come to mind, right? It's expectation on the one hand, but then non-attachment on the other hand. So that's in essence what that whole like idea around like just going out there, being free and having fun. That's how it that's how it presents itself, if you will. So two of the things that I would say also lead into you being able to create that dynamic in your life, in your domain, is the one piece is preparation. And so if we know that we have proper preparation and we've prepared, then it gives you a little bit more free will and free space to just go out there and perform, because at the end of the day, you put in the work. It's probably a little bit more nerve wracking, on the other hand, if you know deep down that you left something on the table in the days, weeks, and months leading up to that point. But to the extent you know deep down that you showed up every day, you put in the work to prepare yourself, and you saw those constant micro progressions, and you put in the reps, then when you show up on performance day, then the only thing you can do is go out and perform in a manner consistent with what you've done up to that point, right? And then you just kind of got to let the cards fall where they may. But I think that it takes the work ahead of time to get to that point where you can both expect the outcome that you actually desire, while also being unattached to that one specific kind of like performance and how it's going to go. Because you're like, look, I did everything that I was supposed to do. So let's just go out there and enjoy ourselves, because at the end of the day, we know it's all gonna work. There's a author and business coach that I respect a lot, and I you know consume and learn from and study a lot of his content. And one thing is, his name is Myron Golden. He said, all work works. So that's the thing, is all work works. It's either working on you or it's working for you. And it's like, sometimes most of us aren't willing to let the work on us to then get us to becoming the person where the work works for us. But if we can like really accept that and hold that, believe that at a visceral level, that no matter the outcome in this one specific particular instance, it's going to work. It's working. It's either working on me or it's working for me. If it's not working for me, it's only a matter of time before it does, because it's working on me throughout this process. Then it can give you a little bit of that, again, like I said, space to be more unattached from the outcome, while at the same time expecting that it is going to work. If not, today or tomorrow than at some point in the future, but it's for certain going to work. And that was what I was able to always hold tightly onto. I don't know where it came from, but I always knew that it was going to work no matter what. No matter what it looked like right now, I just knew that I just saw it no other way. I was gifted with that in a way. I was completely blind to appearances in many instances relative to that, to playing ball, whether it be an injury, whether it be certain points throughout my career where it looked like other players might have been performing better than me, in which case, if I don't have a spot, how am I going to do this? I never let that stuff kind of like convolute my own vision and expectation for what the future held. Um, so those are the things that kind of like come to mind relative to being able to get out there and
Yeah, so I want to read you a quote, and then I have a follow up question.
cool.
Um, you talking about, and Myron's fantastic, by the way. I highly encourage
Yeah,
anyone who's interested, go on YouTube, type in Myron Golden, you'll learn a ton. But
yeah,
there was this quote that San Antonio Spurs had in their locker room, and I'm going to read it here so that I don't mess it up. It says, "When nothing seems to help, I go and look at a stonecutter hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times without as much as a crack showing in it. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two. And I know it was not that last blow that did it, but all that had gone before."
yeah, yeah. I mean, that whole dynamic, it literally, transports me back to that game that I was telling you about, how I had this big breakout game against this guy at that time when we were playing Temple. It's like it was all of those blows before leading up to that when nothing seemed as if to the naked eye that it was working, right? And then all of a sudden it's this kind of like explosion, exponential proportion. And in many instances, that's the same exact thing that happens in business in many instances as well, to the extent we stay the course. Um, I One of the other things that I recognized more specifically as it relates to business and it relates to sports in a lot of ways as well is that um, you can see certain individuals get into what appears to be maybe a new business environment, a new business model, a new business strategy, and have what appears to be instant success, right? But what we don't see oftentimes is all of the groundwork that they laid and all of like those past failures that built into like these hard skills, into like wisdom and all of these other specific functions necessary to have a cohesive business success. Sales skills, persistence, resilience, marketing ability, um, an understanding of the finance and accounting aspects of it, financial management, um, leadership, all of these separate like subsets that are critical to any level of like business success. We didn't necessarily see that those individuals that appeared to have like this overnight success in their business domain in some like specific maybe marketing strategy, if you will. It's like, how did this person get such incredible results like in a month, in 2 months, 3 months, where other folks they toil for years and they're not able to access that, right? Well, it's oftentimes because they had all of the necessary skill sets built prior, and then they just needed to layer on that one last final unlock. But it required the resilience and persistence to hone and build all of those character traits. And really, the most important part is, those identity based behaviors, right? The identity based behaviors around like discipline, leadership, salesmanship, communication, right? I mean, these are like the critical elements to any level of success in business. Think about communication. How big is that? How important is that? No one on any level that we admire and know their name is not in a business realm is not a great communicator. And even in sports, no one that we know their name and admire to any level or degree is not a great leader. Do you know what I'm saying? Because to be able to materialize that level of success in a sport, you have to like lead by example. Even if you're the quietest guy in the room, you lead by example in the type of commitment and work that you put in when no one is looking. So these are the things that we need to be very clear on and like approach performance in our lives in this very like holistic and like cohesive way. It's like all of these things matter. It matters at a very deep level, your character, um, mind, body, spirit. You just like how, what do they say? Like how you do one thing is how we do all things, right? So that those are the things that kind of like come to mind when you convey that quote that the Spurs, those guys have, hanging up in their locker. I'm curious what year that was that was hanging up in there, but um, I know like back in that Tim Duncan and um, Parker era, they definitely like were an exemplary illustration of that mentality.
Yeah, I want to. You mentioned communication, and it's so funny because I was joking around with my buddies the other day. When I was in college, and the same goes for a lot of my friends. We viewed, I took a semester of communication, and I remember at the time viewing it as this like joke of a class. Like we had to like get up and like read these poems or like do these presentations. I was like, dude, this is such a waste of time. Like, let me just get to my core classes. Now, having seen and understanding what I know, I'm like, dude, I wish I had gone like a communication minor or something, or I wish I had taken like
Yeah.
more communication classes. Like, I ended up being probably one of the most relevant classes I like ever took in college.
No. Yeah. That's no question. I mean, even with me, with sports, right? I've got to be like grateful and fortunate, thankful to the fact that I remember like my mom like forced me to do these speeches. I remember as a kid like doing speech meets and like being at church and having to be a part of like we had like a traveling like speaking group where we gave these little speeches and presentations that we'd have to memorize and then say in front of a whole bunch of people. And I did it because I was like urged to do it. But I think that probably started to instill some of like those native skill sets around being able to get up in front of people and convey ideas with a level of fluidity and clarity and self confidence. And who knew? But I deeply believe that led to me having the draft stock that I had, because when it came to like sitting in an interview room with a head coach, a GM, or an owner, I could convey via words who I was and the type of person that I was. And I think that led into me having a really good reputation as it related to character. And a lot of organizations believed that would um, materialize as a good leader within an organization, and that only helped my my draft stock, right? Um, so again, like I said, communication is one of, if not, you know, one of the top, really identity based skill sets that you would second only to imagination, right? These are the things that really lead into and play themselves out in a way in which you're able to access success, right?
Wait, for the sake of time, we're gonna jump around in your timeline here a little bit. You
Let's do
mentioned
it.
draft night. You got drafted first round, 16th overall pick to the San Diego Chargers.
Yeah.
You went on to have a career in San Diego and then ended up in Tampa where you closed out your career. A lot of people on the internet will look at your career and look at the potential and call you the B word, not a bitch, but a
Mm-hmm.
bust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you
Yeah.
say to people who call you a bust?
That's none of my business, to be quite honest. You know, um, I had to learn very quickly um, that there's not an overwhelming amount of value in having any level of uh, care, for lack of a better term, as to what other people think. Sure, I would love for people to hold me in high regard and like me, but if they don't, then that's really none of my business. That's their business, right? What I care about the most is what I think of me, right? And when I look at my career, do I believe that um, there were things that I would have wanted to maybe have turned out differently? Of course. But my biggest thing is I take away everything that happened throughout my career as the most meaningful level of learning lessons that are fueling both current and future success in every endeavor of life that I have pursued since. And again, like I don't really hold too much attachment at all um, to what any one individual or writer or journalist would have viewed my career as. I do, however, I do reconcile with the fact that during that time, it deeply impacted, it deeply impacted the way I felt during that time. Um, I even believe that to a degree, like I created um, almost like um, very deep levels like of guilt and kind of like survivor's remorse, if you will, because especially like those early to like mid career type years where I was sidelined by injury, I um I held that in a very heavy manner walking into work each day. I remember I guess it probably would have been from 2010 to 2012. Um I was dealing with a broken bone in my foot that broke 3 times over that 2 year time span, and I uh I wasn't able to play. And I held on to that in a way that was very like non conducive to me, kind of like coming back and having the level of results that I expected out of myself. And so I think I feel in a lot of ways like I beat myself up and felt as though I owed so much to my teammates and the organization that it created like a detrimental and negative impact that I then held in my body that probably prompted and forced even more that as it relates to like the healing process. I'll put it like this: I don't think it helped it, right? And I think that some of the same qualities about myself that got me to that point of becoming a first round draft pick, I then had to, through trials, tribulations of the years that followed after that, after the injuries in the beginning of my career and what have you, I had to go through a lot of like really just tough learning lessons to go back and then recover that level of like faith and self conviction, confidence and certainty around who it was and what I had to offer. So I'm so grateful that I actually like went through that because it forced me to remember actually who I was, because there were a few years throughout the middle of my career where I believe very deeply that I had forgotten, you know, and that played out in the results that I got there, the injuries and like the last lackluster results that I expected out of myself. So that's kind of like how I look at that whole dynamic. Is I've completely like separated from what anybody else's perception or view of what my career was into explicitly what it meant for me, and then what it prompted me to become and what it prompted me to remember about myself and who I was. So that's kind of the way I view all of that.
Dude, listening to your story and your answer, it reminds me a lot of what Deshaun Kaiser said when he was on the podcast, because a lot of people labeled him as a bust. He had that one season where he went 0-16. Obviously, was drafted to be the savior for the Browns, this new quarterback that was going to take him to great heights. And he just talked about how like nobody else saw what he had to go through and what he had to do and how much preparation he put in. And that's ultimately what made him at peace with himself, knowing that, you talked about regret earlier. For Deshaun, it was knowing that he had no regrets. He would wake up at 4 a.m. and go study film and do all this stuff to prepare and practice his ass off and lift weights and, the whole nine, just to get ready to try and win, to try and perform at a level that would be acceptable to him and to him only. And
Mm-hmm.
so all of that stuff, Sean Clifford, backup quarterback for the Packers, was on the pod talking about the same exact thing. He was like, dude, when I was at Penn State, wasn't doing too hot. People were on me. And the only thing that would keep me at peace with myself was knowing that nobody else knew about the fact that I would have to wake up at 4 or 5 a.m., walk through the snow to get to practice, to all do all these things. Like nobody else sees that except for you. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's ultimately what helped him get through that, is again knowing that he was doing all that he could to perform at a level that he wanted to be at.
Yeah.
So again, all those things that you talked about, the stuff that you don't see, it matters a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. The one thing to also remember as well is about all of the critics that have an opinion is Pastor Miles Monroe. He had this incredible quote that I heard um, a while back that I just thought it was so spot on. But he said, "Critics criticize because they have the time, right?" And the one thing about me that I've noticed is I've never, ever, not once have I had the time to have an opinion about anyone else and what I would characterize them as. It was so far, it was none of my business. I couldn't care less because I'm focused on me becoming the absolute epitome of capitalizing on and unlocking my highest potential. But it's those very folks, right, that have the time to criticize others that I believe get that and use that as an outlet because they see in a very deep level the lack of actualization, if you will, within themselves. It's those very folks that aren't doing anything that have time to call someone else's career a failure or whatever they want to say, right? I've never had the time ever to worry about what anybody else's career meant or whether or not they were a bust or a success because I was always too focused on me, my potential, and did I unlock every last ounce of it, or am I unlocking every last ounce of it? Again, like I said, future focused, right? I have zero time to be focused on what anybody else is, or it's not my business. I'm so focused on me and my own becoming, fulfilling my own purpose, my own mission, my own assignment. And I think that we would all do very well to have that level of um, like a point of reference, if you will. In fact, I would even argue that it's actually our duty because we all have a purpose, we all have a mission, and we hold the duty to the man beside us to materialize, refine our purpose, our mission, and become what we are supposed to be because we're supposed to serve the man next to us. So I think that we should all start to adopt a little bit more of that point of reference relative to ourselves and our world.
Love that, man. That's a great message. One last question to round us out here. What is
Sure.
more fulfilling, sacking the quarterback or fatherhood?
Oh man, without question, it's definitely fatherhood. Especially, sacking the quarterback. I can tell you is sacking the quarterback is for me was always more of a relief because it is I don't know. It was a funny thing. It was like that was as a pass rusher, you really deeply believe and you feel that that's your job, that's your responsibility. And so us pass rushers, we line up every single play, and that is like our expectation. That's what gets us out of our to explode out of that stance. We want to sack every play. And for me, when they came, it was like, all right, got it. Now line up again. Next one, I need to do it again, right? But fatherhood, especially having this opportunity to have a beautiful daughter, a baby girl, it just gets better and better each day. I'm so grateful that I have that.
Love it. Larry, this has been an awesome hour and 5 minutes that I've had the pleasure of talking to you, picking your brain on your journey to football, and now obviously everything that you're doing on the business side of things. So I thank you again for coming on. But before we sign off, where can people find you and more of your work?
Sure. Larry English on LinkedIn, at Larry English underscore on Instagram. That is a good start. We'll have a bunch of new content that'll be coming out on all platforms. Look out for my peak performance book on the way in the next 4 to 6 months that'll be dropping. And yeah, stay tuned because I'm excited about ways in which I can kind of serve our audience and really get our message out there.
I love it, man. We're gonna have to have you back on once the book drops to talk more about it.
Let's do
Larry
it.
English,
Let's
everyone.
do it.
Larry, thanks so much for your time again, and I'm sure we'll chat again real soon.
Cool. Take it easy, Nick. Thank you, man.